Hi there. I'm just a little cat trying to reach my first 1,000 subscribers. It's free. Just click subscribe right under this video. It would mean the world to me.
The moment I knew things would never be the same was when I overheard my mother talking to her friend at Luke's wedding reception. She was sipping a glass of overpriced wine they didn't pay for, standing in her designer heels she justified as a splurge for the big day, and laughing as she said, "Well, we're just so happy Luke found someone. He was always the more sensitive one. Rachel's strong. She'll be just fine." That sentence settled in my gut like wet cement. I was standing 5 feet away, clutching a basket of flower petals I was asked to hand out to guests, because apparently I hadn't done enough already. I had helped plan this whole wedding from start to finish. The seating chart, the bridesmaid drama, the last-minute switch from chicken to steak. I handled all of it. And now here I was, the sister of the groom, being spoken about like a sturdy piece of furniture, dependable, unexciting, and overlooked. Looking back, maybe I should have seen it coming. Luke had always been the golden child. He was younger by 4 years, the baby of the family, the one who needed just a little more help when it came to school, finances, breakups, moving apartments, you name it. When he wrecked his car in college, they bought him another one within a week. When I cracked my radiator driving home from work in the middle of winter, they said, "That's what savings are for." I was 24, juggling 2 jobs and trying to chip away at my student loans, and all I got was a hang-in-there text from Mom. Fast forward to Luke's engagement. My parents practically tripped over themselves to write checks. They covered the entire wedding, the honeymoon to Costa Rica, and even gave them a hefty down payment for their first home in a suburban cul-de-sac that looked like something out of a Hallmark movie. I watched it all unfold, trying to be supportive, trying not to let the bitterness creep into my voice when I congratulated them for the 4th time that week. I reminded myself that it wasn't a competition, that I had always been the independent one. That's what they called it, independent, as if it was this badge of honor I should wear proudly while everyone else got handouts. I didn't realize independent was just code for not our problem. So when I got engaged to Mark a year later, I honestly thought maybe, just maybe, they'd be excited for me. We were at a Sunday lunch at their place, and I showed them the ring. My mom's first reaction was, "Oh, that's sweet, honey. Did you two pick a date yet?" No tears, no squeals, no questions about venues or color palettes. Just a lukewarm reaction followed by an awkward silence. I gave it a beat, then asked gently if they might be able to help with some of the costs, even if just a little. I didn't expect a blank check. I just wanted to feel supported. My dad cleared his throat and said, "We're a little tired of spending, Rach. You know how much your brother's wedding cost. And you've always managed just fine on your own." That line hit me like a slap across the face. I nodded slowly, trying not to let my face betray what I was feeling. Mark was sitting beside me, his hand gently resting on my knee under the table, but even he was caught off guard by how quickly the mood shifted from casual brunch to calculated rejection. I didn't say anything then. What was there to say? That they had shown their hand too clearly? That all my childhood suspicions were now confirmed in a single soul-crushing sentence? That after all the times I had swallowed my pride, played the peacemaker, made excuses for them, they couldn't even fake excitement for me? When we got back in the car, Mark tried to comfort me, telling me maybe they just needed time to come around, that maybe they felt financially tapped out. But I wasn't hearing it. Something had snapped inside me, not in an angry, fiery explosion kind of way, but in a quiet, irreversible shift. The kind you don't come back from. The kind that settles deep in your bones and makes you see everything with painful clarity. In the days that followed, I waited for them to call, to offer something, a small gesture, a wedding scrapbook from Mom's attic, a loan, a cake tasting, even a damn phone call asking how I was feeling, but there was nothing, just radio silence. Meanwhile, they were posting pictures with Luke and his wife at Home Depot, picking out paint colors for their nursery like they were starring in some Pinterest-perfect fairy tale. I watched it all unfold on Facebook while I was researching affordable venues and making spreadsheets for catering quotes. And I realized something that day. something I think I always knew but had never really said out loud, even to myself. I was not the daughter they doted on. I was the daughter who handled things, who didn't complain, who picked up the slack and never made a fuss. I was the safety net, the contingency plan, the backup, but not anymore. Because if they weren't going to show up for me, then maybe they didn't deserve a seat at my table. And if they thought I'd just go on accepting it with a tight smile and a few sarcastic jokes, they were in for a surprise. As I stared at my engagement ring that night, my mind already racing through wedding ideas and guest lists, I found myself circling a single thought like a vulture circling its prey. If they're tired of spending, then I'm tired of pretending. And that was the beginning. The morning after that gut punch of a conversation, I sat alone at the kitchen table with a mug of lukewarm coffee that I'd reheated 3 times but never managed to drink, staring at the list I had made weeks earlier titled Wedding Things to Ask Mom and Dad, the bullet points now feeling like a cruel joke. I remember looking at that crumpled paper where I had scribbled things like venue ideas, family heirloom veil, and mom's favorite bakery for cake tasting, and feeling the slow, icy numbness creep over me, not the loud kind of heartbreak that makes you cry in a dramatic burst, but the quiet kind, the kind that drains the color out of a moment and leaves you hollow and confused, unsure if you're overreacting or finally seeing things as they are. When I called my mom that afternoon, hoping for something, an apology, a walk back, a crack in her voice that said she knew they had hurt me, what I got instead was the kind of emotionally sterile rationalization that only made things worse. She answered with her usual distracted tone, the one she used when she was folding laundry or flipping through the cable guide. And when I told her I felt blindsided and, frankly, a little abandoned, she paused, then let out a soft sigh and said, "Honey, you have to understand. Your brother needed the help. You don't. You've always been so strong, so capable. We just figured you'd be fine." That sentence stuck with me not just because of what it said, but because of what it didn't say. She wasn't sorry. She didn't think they had done anything wrong. In her mind, Luke was the one who needed rescuing, and I was the one who could float. The worst part was, it wasn't said with malice. It wasn't said with any particular venom. It was said like fact. Like the sky is blue and Rachel will always figure it out. I hung up the phone after murmuring something half-coherent and sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, not crying, just absorbing. Mark found me there 20 minutes later and asked if I was okay. And when I didn't answer, he sat down next to me and said the thing that broke the spell. If they can't celebrate you the way they celebrated him, why are you even thinking about inviting them? That night, I barely slept. I kept running through memories in my head like a film reel stuck on loop. The year I got into grad school and paid for it myself, they sent a congratulations card. The year Luke dropped out of his program, they paid for a trip to get his head clear. When I got promoted at work, they asked what my new title was, then pivoted to ask if I could help Luke write a resume. For years, I told myself it was just the way families worked. Not everything's equal. You don't keep score. But the more I looked back, the more I realized it wasn't just uneven. It was a pattern, a blueprint. And I had been fitting myself into the cracks, playing the good daughter because I didn't know how to be anything else. I didn't tell them we had started wedding planning. I didn't tell them we chose a date, or that we put down a deposit on a little winery just outside of town that had fairy lights strung through the trees and an old barn that would look perfect with white linen and late summer flowers. I didn't tell them we met with a caterer who served the kind of food that made you close your eyes when you took a bite. I didn't tell them because I didn't want to give them the opportunity to act like they cared after they made it clear they didn't. But I did start telling myself something new, that this day, this wedding, was going to be a reflection of the life Mark and I wanted to build, not the one I came from. I stopped imagining my mother helping me into a gown, or my father walking me down the aisle, and instead I imagined a day filled with people who actually saw me, who actually showed up, who weren't there out of obligation but out of love. That's when the idea started. At first, it was just a petty thought, a fleeting fantasy. I remembered that band they used to listen to all the time when we were kids, this cheesy 80s pop rock group that had a couple of big hits and used to be the soundtrack to every barbecue and road trip. My parents still talked about them like they were gods. They even saw them live once in Chicago and wouldn't shut up about how it was the best night of their lives. I had no idea if they still performed, or if they were just lounging in some retirement community playing bingo. But the idea got stuck in my head like a song you can't shake. I pulled out my laptop late one night, well past midnight, and searched their name. I found a website, simple, outdated, obviously run by someone's cousin, but it had a contact page, an email, a number. I stared at the screen for a long time before typing a short message, pretending to be a wedding planner, asking if the band ever played private events. I didn't expect a response. I figured it was a long shot, but the next day, I got a call. It was a gruff, friendly guy named Ron, who said they weren't doing a ton of gigs these days, but were always open to the right kind of party. When I told him the location and date, and casually dropped my parents' names just to see if it would land, he laughed and said, "Wait, they were at the Chicago show, weren't they? Your mom had that sign. Oh yeah, we remember them." That's when I knew. This wasn't just a fantasy anymore. This was a plan, and the best part? They wouldn't even see it coming. By the time we mailed the invitations, I had rehearsed a dozen explanations in my head for why their names weren't on the list. But the truth was, none of them mattered because, in the end, I didn't owe anyone an excuse for reclaiming my peace. The guest list had been carefully curated, names selected not just for their relationship to us, but for the way they had shown up, whether with encouragement, kindness, or just the quiet loyalty of consistent presence. And when it came time to finalize the last round of RSVPs, I stared at the 2 blank spaces at the bottom corner of the spreadsheet, Mom and Dad, and for a moment I hovered over the keyboard, the cursor blinking like it was daring me to type. But I didn't. I let the spaces stay empty, and I closed the laptop with a deep, steady breath because for once, I wasn't going to let guilt run the show. There's something surreal about planning a wedding without the people who brought you into the world. And not because you lost them to tragedy or time, but because they lost you through years of quiet dismissals and misaligned priorities. As we moved into the final stages, tasting menus, floral arrangements, table settings, I expected the weight of their absence to pull at me, to twist itself into a knot of second-guessing in my chest. But strangely, it didn't. What I felt more than anything was this unexpected sense of freedom. It was like someone had turned the volume down on a song I didn't even realize had been blaring in the background my entire life. A song full of need, of trying, of bending myself into whatever shape might finally earn their full attention. Without their voices in the mix, I could finally hear my own. Mark, bless his heart, never once pushed. He had his doubts early on, sure, but once he saw how serious I was, he stood behind me with a quiet, unwavering calm that reminded me exactly why I said yes to him. When I told him I wasn't inviting them, he didn't ask for a breakdown of every holiday gone wrong or every moment of favoritism that led me to that decision. He just looked at me and said, "Okay, so we're doing this our way." And that was the moment I realized I hadn't just found a partner, I had found someone who knew how to love me without making me fight for it. Still, the whispers started once the invitations started arriving. My Aunt Brenda called to double-check if there had been a mix-up. My cousin Jenny texted, trying to act casual, but clearly fishing. Even Luke, who had been strangely quiet through most of the engagement, finally sent a message, just one line. "Are you sure you want to go through with this?" It was the first thing he'd said to me in months, and it only confirmed what I suspected all along, that even when I made the most important decision of my adult life, my family's first instinct wasn't to support me, it was to question me. But what they didn't understand, what I didn't even fully understand until I found myself writing checks and signing contracts and making choices without their input, was that I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't looking to prove anything or start a war. I was simply done. done begging for a seat at the table they had already decided I didn't belong at, done waiting for approval from people who had spent years handing it out like rationed candy, always making sure Luke had the lion's share while I scraped by on the leftovers. The winery where we held the wedding was just far enough outside the city to feel like an escape, with winding roads that opened up to a view of vineyards stretching out like a green and gold quilt under the late summer sun. The ceremony was simple, intimate, perfect. We wrote our own vows. I wore a dress that wasn't what I'd imagined when I was 12, but felt right in all the ways that mattered. And when I walked down the aisle, it wasn't my father on my arm. It was my godfather, the man who had quietly stepped up my entire life in the ways that actually counted, who never missed a birthday, who cheered at my high school graduation louder than anyone else in the crowd. The reception was where it all came together. We kept the details under wraps on purpose, and when the band took the stage, a little older, a little grayer, but still bursting with the kind of joy that made everyone rush to the dance floor, our guests went wild. Everyone except the two people who would have lost their minds with excitement had they been there. The lead singer, bless him, even gave a shout-out mid-set to the parents of the bride who once danced to us like nobody was watching, and I swear to God, for one fleeting moment, I felt something close to pity, because that moment, that perfect, ridiculous, joyful eruption of sound and nostalgia and love, that was something they would never get back. I heard later from Brenda that my parents had found out about the band through someone's Facebook story. She told me my mom had gone pale, and my dad just stood there watching the video, his mouth set in that tight line he used whenever he didn't want to show he was rattled. I didn't ask for more details. I didn't need them. Because the truth was, I hadn't done any of it to hurt them. I'd done it to heal myself. And if that healing happened to come with a side of poetic justice, well then I guess the universe has a better sense of humor than I gave it credit for. The night before the wedding, when most brides are probably caught up in nerves or excitement or wondering whether the cake will arrive on time, or if the seating chart will hold together under the weight of delicate family dynamics, I was standing barefoot in the middle of the venue's garden courtyard, with a glass of red wine in my hand and the faint hum of fairy lights buzzing overhead, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Quiet. Not the kind of quiet that comes from absence or solitude, but the kind that settles in your bones when you realize, maybe for the first time, that you're not waiting for someone else to fill a void or explain your worth or validate the life you've built piece by piece, even when it didn't look like the one you imagined as a kid. Mark had gone to bed early after spending the day fielding last-minute texts from guests and calming down the florist, who had arrived an hour late and forgotten about the centerpieces. He told me before heading inside that no matter what went wrong the next day, it was already perfect because we were doing it our way, and if we could survive the florist and the cake baker nearly canceling over a scheduling mix-up, then we could probably survive marriage too. I laughed, kissed him on the cheek, and stayed outside long after the staff had gone home, sipping wine and letting the air wrap around me like a blanket I hadn't realized I needed. And somewhere in that silence, I thought of them, my parents, not with anger or longing or some late-breaking change of heart, but with a kind of detached curiosity. Like when you look at an old photograph and wonder if the version of yourself in it would even recognize who you've become. I wondered what they thought was happening that night. I wondered if my mom was pacing the living room, feeling like she forgot something she was supposed to do. I wondered if my dad turned the TV volume up too loud, just to drown out the silence. I wondered if Luke said anything to them at all, or if he kept his mouth shut like he always did, choosing neutrality over discomfort, which had always been his quiet specialty. The next morning came not with chaos, but with the calm clarity of purpose, the kind that carries you from task to task like a current you don't have to fight. The dress fit like a second skin. The makeup artist worked miracles even with my shaky hands. And the playlist I had curated for the bridal suite played softly in the background as I stood in front of the mirror, brushing a strand of hair behind my ear and thinking, this is what it feels like when you stop asking for permission to be happy. The ceremony itself was as close to magic as real life gets. There was a breeze that seemed to blow in on cue, rustling the trees just enough to feel cinematic, but not chaotic. The guests were all there, beaming, clapping, crying in the right places. And when I walked down the aisle on the arm of my godfather, his grip steady, his smile proud, it felt like a lifetime of disappointments and dismissals had finally led me to this one defiant, perfect moment. But it was the reception that carved itself into memory, like a tattoo you don't even feel happening until it's done. The band, as expected, stole the show. They played the classics, the songs that made people forget they were wearing uncomfortable shoes, the anthems that had once belonged to a generation that raised us but now belonged to us. When the lead singer introduced the song my parents used to dance to in the kitchen on Friday nights, the one they swore was their song, I felt 1,000 emotions rise to the surface, not one of them rooted in regret. Because even though they weren't there to hear it, even though they chose not to be part of this chapter, the memory of who they used to be, who we used to be, was present in that moment. Not as a wound, but as a reminder. Later, during the toasts, my maid of honor gave a speech that was equal parts hilarious and heart-wrenching, detailing how Mark and I had met, how we fought like siblings over which restaurant to choose, but made up like lovers who knew the fight was never really about food. And then it was Mark's turn, and he raised his glass, looked at me with that quiet adoration that never felt performative, and said, "To Rachel, who taught me that doing things the hard way sometimes means doing them the right way. To building something not because it was handed to us, but because we chose it, deliberately and together. And then it was mine. I hadn't planned to speak, not really, but something about the moment, the way the candles flickered, the hum of 100 people waiting, the music still reverberating through the wooden beams, compelled me. So I stood up, heart pounding, and said, I want to thank every person in this room who chose to be here, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. This wedding wasn't about tradition or obligation. It wasn't about checking boxes or following blueprints. It was about starting something from scratch with the man I love, and doing it surrounded by people who actually see us. So to the ones who showed up, for the laughter, the work, the late-night texts, the emotional labor, and the honest love, this day is yours too. And just like that, I put the microphone down and returned to my seat, a little shaken, but feeling more seen than I ever had in my life. The rest of the night blurred into laughter and dancing and cake and messy hugs, and bad singing and better kisses. But somewhere near the end, as Mark twirled me around the dance floor and the band played their final song, I caught a glimpse of a guest showing a video on their phone to someone at their table. A clip from the ceremony, and I didn't even have to ask to know it would find its way to them. To my parents, to the two people who had always been so close, yet never quite within reach. But this time, for the first time, I didn't ache at the thought. I didn't wonder how they would feel. Because the truth was, I had stopped needing their approval long before the music started. And that, more than anything, felt like the real beginning. It was 2 weeks after the wedding, a lazy Saturday morning that had the luxury of silence only newlyweds understand. That gentle kind of quiet that doesn't ask to be filled and only makes room for soft footsteps, coffee brewing in the kitchen, and the unspoken ease of knowing there's no place else you need to be. Mark was outside pruning the plants that had arrived as part of the post-wedding floral chaos, and I was curled up on the couch, flipping through our preliminary wedding photos on my laptop, each image more radiant and surreal than the last. Candids of laughing guests, blurry dancing feet, the sunlight pouring through the trees just as we said our vows. Everything felt suspended in time, locked into this perfect, emotional amber, untouched by the usual friction of real life. Then my phone buzzed. It was subtle, not the kind of sound that usually startles or demands attention, but for some reason, when I glanced down and saw Luke's name on the screen, a dull, anxious flutter started somewhere in my chest and worked its way upward, like my body already knew that the moment I opened that message, something inside me would shift again, maybe not in the same tectonic way it had when I decided to cut our parents out of the wedding, but in a quieter, more insidious manner, like a tremor that only you can feel. His message wasn't long. It was short, blunt even, but it carried the kind of weight that can only come from someone who's seen all the messy middle parts of your life and still manages to choose a side, even if that choice is silence. It read, "I saw the video. I guess you really meant it. You know Mom hasn't left the house since. Dad says she cries in the kitchen at night." That was it. No punctuation, no question, no apology, just a cold, factual observation dressed up as guilt, tossed into my lap like a grenade with the pin already pulled. And for a moment, I just stared at it, rereading it again and again, waiting for the part of me that always cracked under family pressure to resurface and start bargaining. I waited for the voice that said, "Maybe you were too harsh," or "Maybe they didn't realize how bad it was," or "They're your parents after all." But it didn't come. What came instead was something far more unsettling. A stillness, a kind of emotional stillness I'd never experienced before. Not in this context. It was the kind of clarity that's not loud or triumphant, but quietly final, like closing a book you loved once, but can never read again because the ending changed you. Mark walked in just a few minutes later, carrying a small bundle of clipped herbs and wearing that proud, goofy smile that always creased a little more on one side. He saw the look on my face immediately and asked, with quiet concern, "Bad news?" I handed him the phone without speaking, and he read the message, jaw tightening just enough to be visible. After a moment, he handed it back and said, "Are they trying to make you regret it?" And I remember replying not with anger or defiance, but with something closer to sadness. "No, they're trying to make me feel responsible for their feelings, without ever taking responsibility for mine." I didn't reply to Luke. Not that day, not the next. The message sat there in my phone like an unopened letter from a chapter I was no longer willing to rewrite. Because what no one tells you about choosing yourself, about drawing a line in the sand and saying, "Enough," is that even when it's the right thing, even when it sets you free, it still hurts. It hurts not because you regret the decision, but because you realize how long you lived without the thing you needed, how hard you fought to feel seen by people who never really tried to understand you in the first place. Over the following weeks, the stories started trickling in through the grapevine. Brenda called to say Mom had mentioned the wedding photos looked beautiful, though she said it in that distant, performative tone she always used when she wanted to appear unaffected. My cousin posted something passive-aggressive on Facebook about family divisions and learning to forgive, which felt like a direct jab wrapped in a Hallmark caption. But none of it landed the way it used to. None of it found its mark, because somewhere between planning the wedding, booking that band, and walking down that aisle without the people who should have been there, I had shed a skin I didn't realize I was wearing. And yet, late one night, I did something I didn't expect. I opened the voice memo app on my phone and recorded a message. Not for Luke, not for my parents, for me. I said out loud, in the quiet of our bedroom, "I'm not angry anymore. I'm sad, but I'm not sorry. I made a choice, and it was the first time I put my own happiness above their expectations. I hope one day they understand. But even if they don't, I do, and that's enough. I never sent it. I never even saved it. But I listened to it once, all the way through, and something in me relaxed. Because I knew in that moment that closure doesn't always come in a conversation or an apology or some neat ending. Sometimes, closure is a private moment in a dark room where you say the thing you've never had the chance to say, and you finally believe it. They still haven't reached out. I don't know if they ever will. And while part of me still wonders what might happen 10, 20 years down the line, birthdays missed, holidays spent apart, grandkids they may never meet, I also know that the version of me who would have bent over backwards to repair the damage is gone. She left the day I chose to build something real, something mine. And honestly, I don't miss her one bit.